Industry, the manufacturing of goods in a factory, first originated through the Industrial Revolution, a period between 1750 and 1950. It was a period when many new concepts and inventions arose, which were essential to improving the standard of living, productivity, and economy. It also wasn't solely industrial. It was cited as the cause for population growth, and began in England mainly because of the raw materials there, which were mainly coal and iron. Industrialization through the early 20th century gave Britain enormous advantage and increased power with colonies too. The middle of UK and parts of mainland Europe benefited especially. In the 20th century industrialization after World War I, oil, gas, and coal became more common, and North America and Europe started relying more on foreign countries, such as those in the Middle East. A third revolution is said to be occurring right now, with manual labor being replaced with labor done by machines and controlled by computers. Textile industry was the first to benefit from new processes between 1760 and 1800. A method to spin yarn was developed, but fabrics then had to be woven and bleached. Bleaching then led to the development of the chemical industry. First, bleaches were ashes and sulfuric acid. Later, bleaches included chlorine gas and lime. Today, most fabrics are synthetic and may be made of a petroleum or coal derivative. The most important invention was a steam engine created by James Watt in 1769 because it provided more power for machines. Iron industry took off when Henry Cort invented the iron forge. Coal took the place of wood as a fuel and was used in forging iron. Engineering took off when James Watt and Matthew Boulton went into business and produced many new machines which improved industry. Transportation played a critical role in the revolution. Manufactured products needed transportation routes, so canals and railroads were built. The railroad was a joint effort with William Symington and William Murdoch inventing the locomotive together. William Hedley demonstrated that the iron horse could run on rails if the wheels had rims. Richard Reynolds invented rails, and the first public locomotive was used in England in 1825. The food processing industry took off when the old method of preserving that included drying, fermenting, or pickling was improved in 1810 with Nicholas Appert developing canning. In 1839, Peter Dürren invented the tin can and learned faster sterilizing techniques in 1861. Approximately 3/4 of global industrial production is clustered in industrial regions, but less than 1% of the Earth's land surface is devoted to industry. Primary industrial regions are areas of largest agglomeration of industry. Secondary industrial regions have less agglomeration. Primary regions include Western and Central Europe, North America, Eastern Asia, and former Soviet republics. In Western and Central Europe, industry expanded and recovered after World War II with the Americans' help. Rhine-Ruhr Valley was the biggest industrial complex specializing in iron and steel manufacturing. German industry was considered the best. Other areas include Catalonia. UK had steel and textile industry in the 19th century and high-tech industry in the 20th century. The Mid-Rhine was the most important, with German technology and French resources. This was the center of car companies such as Audi and Mercedes-Benz. The Po Basin, also known as Italy, is one of the most oldest and important industrial regions. It had the first textile manufacturing area, and it benefited from hydroelectricity from the Alps and cheap labor. In North America, World War I and World War II weakened Europe and made US the strongest. Wars were mainly fought out of the mainland, and production for the war helped the economy. Specialized areas developed. Chicago made auto vehicles and other modes of transport, Pittsburgh made steel, and so on. Canada benefited as well, especially in the concentrated northeast US area and the southeast Ontario area. St. Lawrence Valley to the Ontario Peninsula made steel and cars. The region comprises of only 5% of the land area, but 1/3 of the population and 2/3 of the manufacturing outputs. Other industrial areas in North America are New England for textiles originally but now skilled labor, the Mid-Atlantic for seaports, and the Mohawk Valley for aluminum, paper, and steel. The U.S. South is also dominated by right-to-work states, or states that prevent employers from making employees join a union before being hired. In Eastern Asia, 3 areas contain large industrial regions: Japan, China, and the Four Tigers. Japan was the earliest to industrialize. The Meiji Restoration, a government-sponsored campaign for modernization and colonization, called for economic development. Colonies for raw materials were made, and education and other things were transformed. Oligarchs were the industrial and military leaders. The dominant industrial region was the Kanto Plain, followed by Tokyo, specializing in electronics and cars. China had industrial expansion under communism, specializing in cheap labor and textiles. The earliest heartland was Manchuria, followed by Hong Kong, Yangtze River Valley, and Gulf of Bohai. China is industrializing partly by special economic zones, which are government-designated areas where foreign investment is allowed and capitalist ventures are encouraged. Recently, industry increased rapidly, which challenged Japan for economic and political leadership. Other surrounding Pacific Rim areas also recently had industrialization. The Four Tigers consist of South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. They have export-oriented industrialization. Their product life cycle technique is taking an innovation that a country has moved on from and improving it and exporting it back. In Eastern Europe, Ukraine produced a lot of coal, iron, and steel and became a big manufacturer. The Volga River provided raw materials like oil, gas, and transport, and World War II built dams and canals. Russia produced 1/4 of the industrial output, with St. Petersburg specializing in ports, railways, and food processing. The Ural Mountains had over 1,000 types of minerals. Kuznets made coal and iron, and Silesia made steel and coal. Secondary regions lie south of primary regions. They are either still growing or developed later, with less large industrial centers, such as in Southeast Asia. Maquiladoras, encouraged by NAFTA, are factories built by U.S. companies in Mexico near the U.S. border to take advantage of much lower labor costs. In India, industrialization is the result of government policies. They have a large labor force, a good location, hydroelectric potential, and coal and iron ore. The Indians have also benefited from global access to cost reductions of IT and electronic data transmissions. Call centers and computer jobs have led to a strong tertiary sector that is integrated well into the world economy. Apart from industries discussed before, many other types of industries exist. The aluminum industry is mainly in the U.S. U.S. companies are the largest single producers, with plants in 35 states producing about $39.1 billion in products and exports. U.S. supply is comprised of three sources: primary, imports, and recycled. This is important because it is a large industry that is important in transportation, packaging, and building and construction. Next, a basic industry sells products or services primarily to consumers outside the settlement. A non-basic industry sells products primarily to consumers in the community. A cottage industry is the home-based manufacturing rather than a factory that preceded the Industrial Revolution. A footloose industry is neither market or resource-oriented and can locate wherever it wants. A labor-intensive industry is an industry in which labor cost is a high percentage of expense, like in textile and clothing. These unskilled industries are more likely to search for the cheapest labor pool possible, likely in LDCs. The industrial process of Fordist production is the form of mass production in which each worker is assigned one specific task to perform repeatedly. Post-Fordist production is the adoption by companies of flexible work rules, like the allocation of workers to teams that perform a variety of tasks. The distribution of industries can be explained by theories, diffusion patterns, and site and situation factors. The diffusion of the principles of the Industrial Revolution were severely inhibited in Europe due to the instability of the region. Continuous railroads were prevented because of the war. Although the Industrial Revolution spread to North America in the 20th century after it did to Europe, it was adopted more quickly because of the unity of the people. New industries required certain materials like iron, coal, and flowing water, so the density of industries grew far more compact and concentrated around known resources. Site factors include land costs, capital and labor costs or availability, and situation factors are the transportation costs of raw materials and finished goods. Concerning land, one can see that most factories are located in rural or suburban areas because their one-story buildings need a lot of land. Factory owners want cheap land as well as available energy. Some companies select less expensive areas of land to locate factories while headquarters may be elsewhere. Capital in industries usually must be borrowed. A good place where banks readily give money to businesses is Silicon Valley in California, where 1/4 of U.S. capital is spent. Cities may offer tax incentives so factories do not have to pay certain taxes. Many industries, such as textile, are labor-intensive, so companies may look for countries where labor is readily available and cheap. Today, many U.S. factories are locating manufacturing plants in LDCs in a process called outsourcing. But lately, some are insourcing back into the United States because of the more intellectual property, which results in money-saving innovations and less energy prices. Also, U.S. textile companies may locate into the Southeast, where labor unions are not strong. Regarding transportation costs, the most expensive is air, but it is fast, then trucking, which is good for short distances, then the railroad, which is good for long distances, and then shipping, which is slow but cheap. Copper is a bulk producing industry. Copper ore in US is low grade. Less than 1% of what is mined is copper ore. The rest is waste. Copper must be mined, processed, and the waste disposed. The final product weighs less than its inputs. These types of industry are typically concentrated near the import sources and raw materials to decrease the transport cost of bulky inputs. Transportation costs are critical to three types of industries: bulk gaining, like bottling companies, perishable industries such as dairy products, and single markets, like the fashion industry. Single market manufacturers are located near the market because they sell their products primarily to one location. Bulk gaining industries have their location determined by market location as well. Total cost will depend on how far and how fast the products must go and if they have to change the modes of transportation. Break of bulk points are points where the goods have to change methods of transportation, like from rail to shipping. Obstacles to prime industrial location, as determined by site and situation factors, can be personal references of the CEO, historical locations, nostalgic attachment to a specific community, or simply the desire not to participate in the time-consuming and costly search for optimal location. Location factors are changing, and industry is growing in both new and traditional regions, locally and internationally. The cost of labor is changing the spatial organization of industry around the world. Manufacturing jobs in the U.S. are shifting from the northeast to the south and west. Southern right-to-work states are attractive to companies because companies want to keep unions out, and right-to-work states support anti-union attitudes. This is particularly true of the textile and apparel industry. In the 20th century, production in the U.S. moved from the northeast to the southeast to take advantage of cheaper wages and less involvement in unions. The global convergence regions are Eastern and Southern Europe, where income falls behind Europe's average. The competitive and employment regions are Western Europe's core industrial areas, which have lost manufacturing jobs recently. Central Europe is attractive to manufacturers because there is abundant labor and market proximity to Western Europe. Industry has shifted internationally in East Asia, which includes China, Japan, and South Korea, in South Asia, which includes India, and Latin America, which includes Brazil. To illustrate, data shows that steel production was greatest in MDCs in 1980 and has shifted away from that in 2008. U.S. groups accounted for more than 90% of global steel production in 1980, but China had the most rapid increase from 1980 to 2008. More recently, the apparel industry has moved to Latin America, China, and other Asian countries. Now the U.S. imports more than 75% of its clothing needs. This is one part of the new International Division of Labor, or the transfer of jobs. Industrial jobs are transferring to LDCs largely as a result of transnational corporations' search for low-cost labor. Transnational corporations are outsourcing, turning over much of the responsibility for production to independent suppliers and LDCs, so many jobs can be done by low-paid, low-skilled workers. In some MDCs, industry is remaining in traditional regions like Northeast US or Northwest Europe because of skilled labor and rapid delivery to the market. The Fordist approach, named for Henry Ford, traditionally assigned each worker to a specific task in a mass production industry. Post-Fordist production has recently become the norm in MDCs. It is flexible production with skilled workers characterized by teams working together, problem-solving through consensus, and factory workers being treated alike regardless of their level. Just-in-time delivery is the shipment of parts and materials to a factory immediately before they are needed. It avoids the stocking of unnecessary and expensive inventory, which saves space, size, and money. However, labor unrest and disasters can disrupt the reliance on just-in-time delivery. For example, a strike or a natural disaster can shut down an entire production or a delivery. Alfred Weber's least cost theory determines the industry's prime location by taking in factors of labor, transportation, and agglomeration. Industries must know the cost of transportation, which is how much moving raw materials to the factory and products to the market costs. Different types of modes may be used, like rail, trucks, air, and ships. They must also take into consideration the cost of labor. Lastly, industries need to be aware of agglomeration so they can share talents, facilities, and services. This factor often explains the location of industry most. Degglomeration increases labor and transport costs. The substitution principle states that industries tend to substitute one factor of production for another in order to achieve optimum plant location. The locational interdependence theory says that there is influence on a firm's location decision by locations chosen by its competitors. The variable revenue analysis is the firm's ability to capture a market that will earn it more customers and money than its competitors. On a global scale, many industries face a stagnant demand for products. Many people are simply trading in older models of an appliance rather than purchasing one for the first time. From late 1700s to 1970, there was growth of manufacturing. Since 1970, growth has slowed in MDCs because population growth has slowed, but wages have not risen as quickly. There was also inflation, and population is demanding high-quality goods. Recycling has also slowed both the mining and manufacturing industries. To solve these problems, MDCs need to protect their markets from competitors, and LDCs must find new markets and sources of capital. The other major problem is the increased capacity of industries all over the world to produce. Due to the high efficiency of modern manufacturing, the markets have been saturated with products. The supply is plentiful, but the demand is not. In MDCs, trading blocs stand in the way of industry. Trading blocs are international economic coalitions designed to boost the economic well-being of its members. The three major blocs in the world are NAFTA in the Western Hemisphere, European Union in Western Europe, and the Pacific Rim countries in East Asia. While they promote economic cooperation within a bloc, the three blocs seemingly do everything in their power to compete with the other blocs. This leads to taxing imports and limiting the number of imports and exports. Also, disparities exist within trading blocs. LDCs face the same industrial problems that MDCs faced half a century ago: distance from markets and inadequate infrastructure. In addition, they face new problems. As more and more countries industrialize, fewer are left to sell goods to. Thus, more countries are competing for fewer markets. Some MDCs face similar problems because of their geographic isolation, like Australia and New Zealand. People must often sell their goods to their own people who can't afford them. LDCs also face increasing exploitation at the hands of the MDC multinational corporations taking advantage of cheap labor through the new International Division of Labor, which is the transfer of unskilled jobs to LDCs while keeping the better jobs in the MDC. Transnational corporations like maquiladoras make more problems. Industries can get away with more because environmental laws and cost of labor are less strict in LDCs as compared to MDCs. Workers are also protesting for better pay after finding out what Americans are paid. Environmental problems of industry also arise, and they are mainly present due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal and natural gas. They take forever to replace. Growing countries undergoing their version of the Industrial Revolution are building more and more industries, which might strain our reserves. Natural problems caused by these practices are global warming, the greenhouse effect, and acid rain. Some problems, however, are reversible or preventable.